Doors. We all know it, most of us love it. All it is just a simple game about advancing through doors in a hotel while you avoid entities. Wow! It's almost like that's the name of the game. Now this game is pretty popular among the Roblox community, and much like any other popular game, there are about 500 crappy, low-quality copies of the game scattered throughout Roblox. And no, I am not being overdramatic when I say that they are low quality. Honestly, I feel like 90% of these copies are just something along the lines of Doors but bad. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't any good recreations out there. In fact, some of them are really well made and actually seem to have had some effort put into them. So I decided, why not play some of these games to see if they're really as bad as they seem? Are some of them secretly amazing, or are they all heaps of hot trash? Well, I guess we'll find out. Doors but bad. I believe that this is the first one that was made, but it's kinda hard to tell with how many there are. I spawned in a very basic version of the default Doors lobby with elevators that led to 6-player rooms. Yeah, in fact, unless I was just being stupid, literally every single elevator was to a 6-player room. No 4-player rooms, no 3 or 2-player rooms, only 6. There's also this giant cage in the middle of the room that served almost zero actual purpose besides also counting as an elevator for some reason. I don't know, maybe the developer just thought cages were cool or something. I was going to enter the cage to start a run when I met Pretty Girl 00536. She was desperately trying to get me to join her run, but the game devs literally told me not to play with other people. Seems pretty ironic, considering the only elevator type was larger than any of the ones in regular Doors. I repeatedly shook my head to let her know that I was not at all interested in playing with her. She went in herself and continued to try and get me to join, but ran out of time and started her own run on accident. Finally, free of the evil presence of Pretty Girl 00536, I started a run and found out that I was playing on floor 2. Now, rather than falling down a shaft in an elevator when starting a run of floor 2 in the actual game, I simply had to jump into the shaft myself and break my kneecaps in the process. I quickly found out that in order to open a locker, rather than interacting with it, you had to slam your face against the door to get it open. It was also unreasonably difficult to get items out of lockers. Once again, you didn't interact to pick them up, you just had to press your forehead against the shelves until the game let you pick up the item. After clearing the first room and pressing the button to open the door, the entire thing just rotated 90 degrees to the side. I ignored this, knowing that there were probably worse things to come, and continued into the next room, where I encountered a minecart. Apparently in this game, you move minecarts by sitting in them and using the controls rather than just pushing them like in regular Doors. After almost falling to my doom, I figured out what the heck I was doing and drove the very clunky minecart into the next room. The next few doors didn't really lead to anything, at least until I made it to door 105, where I discovered that cash in this game was not only incredibly difficult to come across, but when you picked up a pile of coins, it simply put an item into your inventory labeled 3 coins rather than labeling it as a separate counter. I then encountered my first entity of the run, Giggle, if you can even call whatever this is Giggle. After sliding past the discount octopus spider, I continued the game until I accidentally let one of the fuses needed to enter the next room go into my inventory and not my hotbar. This effectively soft-locked me and ended my run, since I didn't remember which button it was to unlock your mouse, and it doesn't tell you at any point during your run. I dumped all of my Dollar Tree glow sticks onto the ground in hopes that it would automatically cycle the fuse into my hotbar, but this did absolutely nothing and ended the run before I even made it to Seek. Immediately after loading in, I could tell that this game didn't really look all that similar to regular Doors. Rather than a hotel, the lobby looked a lot more like one of those underground parking lots. In fact, the only thing that really looked like a hotel was the floor. Now, this game actually did have a 1-player elevator, unlike the last game, or I guess in this game it's actually a van, not an elevator. But there were only 2 1-player vans in the entire lobby, and one of them was exclusive to hard mode. There were 2 4-player vans and 1 8-player van for some reason. Why anybody would need 8 people in one run, I have no idea. Maybe they just suck at the game. Now, with first impressions out of the way, I started up a run and was met with a 30-second timer that told me it was waiting for players, despite the fact that I was the only one in the game and the game had already started. The decoration in this game was a bit strange, to say the least. The ground looked very similar to default Doors, but the walls and ceilings were all made of stone bricks for some reason. The doors also looked like the gates to the courtyard in regular Doors for some reason, but I don't know what that's about. There's also some absolutely beautiful art scattered around. The items themselves were a bit basic, but nonetheless different than regular doors. There was a can of beans, which sped you up for some reason, a bandage, a scan can, which I still have absolutely no idea what it does, and a lantern. Kind of a weird selection, but it doesn't really matter. I'm cool with it. I almost immediately encountered my first entity, which looked like some Timu miscolored version of Screech. He made no sound, which was a bit annoying, but to make up for this, he was insanely big and very easy to see. Then, not 6 doors later, I found a second entity. I'm not entirely sure if it's a good or bad thing how often you can find entities in this game, but whatever. This one didn't really resemble anything in normal doors. It was kind of just a default Roblox character rig repainted black with some particles. To be honest, I'm not really sure what purpose these things serve within the game, considering they don't seem to have the ability to lock onto players or even see players in the first place. If I had to guess, I would say they probably deal damage to you if you walk directly into them, but they're incredibly easy to avoid, and you could just walk right past them without any issues. So I'm not really sure what the devs were thinking with this one, but it didn't technically make anything worse, it was kind of just there for no reason. After a few more rooms, I found some kind of unique room that was really big and had a bunch of tables and money inside. Now, I'm not really sure what the point of this room is or why there are 2 giant statues of Discount Master Wu, but once again, it didn't really take anything away from the experience, so I'm pretty much fine with it. In the very next room after that, I encountered a third entity. Wow! They really knocked it out of the ballpark with this one, folks. Now, the entity itself seemed to share a suspicious resemblance to the original sprite for A60 from the rooms, but behavior-wise, it just functioned exactly the same as Rush. I also found another variant of the shadowy guys that was kneeling on the ground with text reading crouch above him. Now, for the life of me, I could not figure out how to crouch. It wasn't any of the standard crouching buttons like Control or C, and this was a bit of an issue considering the fact that the guy damages you if you get close to him without crouching. Luckily, he does close to no damage if you're fast, but I had already taken a bit of a beating from him before I actually knew what I was doing, so I had to use my bandage once I actually made it to the next room. Now, this next room is actually Seek, though you wouldn't really be able to tell that, judging by the fact that there were no eyes or really anything signifying that he was coming up, and the room that he spawned in looked like literally every other room in the game. I don't know, maybe the kneeling dude was supposed to let me know that he was in the next room, but that seems a bit tricky for new players and just doesn't really seem that well thought out if it is the case. He came at room 15 for some reason, which is a lot earlier than the Seek Chase and normal doors. He also had the same kind of color inversion that Screech had, and he kind of just crawled through the floorboards after T-posing for a second. The chase itself wasn't really anything special, it kind of just seemed like the regular Seek Chase but lower quality. Also, the last room in the chase just didn't exist, and it instead just spat you out into the next room and even let you go back into the Seek Chase since the doors don't close. Nothing that interesting really happened after that until I made it to door 25, which for some reason was where you would find Figure in this game. Actually, in this game, he's called Stature, and the only real difference between him and regular Figure is that he's gray. Seems like a pretty cheap way to get around directly copying doors, if you ask me. The actual room was some sort of grimy brick hallway system rather than a library, and instead of finding books to solve the combination lock, you had to find colored keys and crank gas valves to escape. To be honest, the entire puzzle was pretty much just like every other colored keys puzzle on Roblox. I'm not really that surprised they used it considering it's one of the most milked puzzle concepts on Roblox, but it's still a bit unique in a way, I guess. Stature had his own issues to deal with, however, because since he was so unbelievably quiet and his volume didn't really increase that much when he got to you, it was really difficult to tell where he was and if you needed to be careful. He actually killed me when he came around from around a corner because I wasn't really able to accurately judge where he was in the map. This problem is made exponentially worse when taking into account the fact that he has no directional audio whatsoever. So you can't tell where he's going, where he's coming from, or even where he is at all. I ended up just quitting out on the game here since I wasn't really having much fun and it was pretty annoying to navigate around the halls when I couldn't even crouch, which meant that Stature was constantly able to hear me walking and just kept pathfinding right to me. Overall, this game wasn't necessarily horrible, but it could definitely use a lot of work. It seems like it was trying to copy doors without actually copying doors, if that makes sense. On the bright side, though, I didn't get soft locked this time. Yippee! Now, already, just by looking around, this game completely blows the others out of the water visually. Not to mention, it also actually had people in the server this time, which was an automatic plus considering that the last two games were just empty. From what I could see, this game seemed like it was trying to act as a sort of separate route for Floor 2 rather than just flat out copying the original game. The lobby itself had Floor 2 elevators as expected, but this time it actually had the right elevator sizes. The numbers went from 1 to 4 as they would normally, rather than whatever the heck was going on in the other games. The lobby had a bunch of storage stuff scattered around, like filing cabinets and cardboard boxes on metal shelves. There was also this weird fungus that was growing everywhere and seemed to just be a decoration, but I'm not entirely sure. After waiting in the elevator for a few seconds, you're met with an insanely smooth and well-made intro animation that even rivals the quality of the official ones. Now, I think you're normally supposed to have a few more people playing with you because the animation looked a bit weird when it was just me in the elevator, but that isn't really bad game design, it just won't look as good for people playing solo. The visuals in this game were amazing. The rooms seemed to continue using the same kind of storage facility type of decoration that the lobby did. I encountered my first entity of the run at door 107, and it was actually just Rush. Now, despite the fact that it's literally the exact same entity as in the original game, it was a bit refreshing in a way, and a nice change of pace from whatever random dollar store entities I saw in the last game. I got attacked by Screech, and it was actually Screech this time instead of some weird knockoff. Soon after this, I found a third entity, but this one was actually new. He knocked and slammed on the door a few times before speeding through the room and knocking out 25 of my health rather than killing me. This surprised me a bit, but it did make sense that it wasn't an insta-kill. It didn't take very long at all for him to break through the door, and I didn't happen to have a closet near me, so new players would just have a tough time determining if it was just ambient noises or an actual entity in time and be able to hide. Appearance-wise, he sort of looked like a warped skull and crossbones with an orange tint, but it was hard to tell with how fast he cleared the room. Eventually, I opened up a door and was met with a power outage, which was a bit ominous and looked like he had done something that I hadn't seen. After looking around for a bit, I got an achievement that said I encountered the black light. Now, I had absolutely no idea what the black light was, and I didn't really feel like finding out, so after I found what looked like a breaker room, I solved the quick generator puzzle. That was actually the same thing you would have to solve in the final room of floor 1 indoors, but it only had one set of lights instead of 3. After a bit, I started seeing eyes, which meant that Seek was coming up. Now, I expected the Seek chase to be roughly the same as the one in the actual game, but I was completely wrong. First of all, the intro animation for Seek was absolutely amazing, and so was the music, which was an intense remix of Seek's theme. The chase itself milked the absolute hell out of the fact that there was a jumping mechanic, though, because there were gaps everywhere and even a few hurdles you had to jump over. But it didn't really make the chase any less fun, so it's pretty much fine. Eventually, I made it to the mid-chase cutscene, but rather than falling into a minecart, you jump down a sewer pipe and start surfing the black goo on a piece of sheet metal. You follow guiding light as it shows you the path through the tunnels until you eventually make it back to solid ground and jump back up onto the floor where the chase continues for a bit more as you dodge Seek's attacks. Eventually, you make it out of the door and it slams down, which cuts Seek in half. Unfortunately, the animation didn't really work that well for me, but it was probably just because of my dog ping. Almost immediately after that, you're met with door 150, where you open a large door and walk past rusty metal cages until you're found by a very strange-looking entity. It wears a cage on its head and seems to have something to do with Seek, judging by the fact that the cage seems to be filled with Seek's goo and has an eye looking through the bars. He attacks you, but some sort of ghost stops him. The ghost wears the same kind of stone rings on its body that some of the angel statues in regular doors had. I'm not really sure if this is hinting at anything or not, but it's still a pretty neat detail. Mr. Cageface then stabs the ghost somehow and throws him to the ground before turning back to you and chasing you up a flight of stairs and into a room. This is where you find a tablet that leads you to levers that you need to turn on while avoiding the entity. The game then tasks you with escaping the prison, which lets us assume that the entity we just saw was the warden. Now, this didn't happen to me because I'm just too goated. But if you turn on a switch that the tablet hadn't led you to yet, it would sound an alarm that would attract the attention of the warden. Somehow, an alarm can get this guy's attention, but a player running 2 feet behind him can't. So I guess he just has bad hearing or something? There were these metal grates scattered throughout the prison that you could crouch and crawl through, but some of them were closed and required a pair of bolt cutters to open. If the warden actually catches you, he doesn't simply kill you, which is a bit surprising. He instead locks you in one of the rusty lockboxes we saw earlier and forces you into an escape minigame where you just have to time hitting the spacebar with the line entering the marked section. For some reason, the cage damages you while you're inside, but this could either be because something about the cage itself is hurting us, like the rust, or maybe there's like spikes or something inside, or it's just too cramped. I don't know. Once you complete the minigame, you force kick the door back open and continue locating the levers. Once you find the final lever, the UI on the tablet changes to show you the location of a computer that you need to input something into. Once you make it to the computer and turn it on, a special security alert sounds throughout the prison and initiates lockdown, which traps the warden inside a room. You then have to quickly memorize a 4-digit code and then time your clicks with the increasing numbers on the screen while the warden is slowly tearing through the metal door that trapped them. Once you repeat this code puzzle 3 separate times with 3 separate codes, the warden finally breaks through and chases you up and into an exit room. You are then met with some pretty familiar lights, and then you soon find Jeff's shop. However, in this game, it's actually a restaurant for some reason, and he sells you 3 types of food. If I had to guess, they all heal you different amounts, but they might also give you different status effects depending on which ones you buy. I never really found out though, because I never really ate any of them. Also, from how it sounds when Jeff disappears into the darkness behind him, I think this guy literally microwaved a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and gave it to me. But I don't really think he knows how to cook in the first place, judging by the fact that he really just only sells you food that doesn't really take any cooking experience whatsoever to make. After I climbed my way out of the construction site, I guess, I found even more eyes, which meant that the second sea chase was coming up. I didn't really know what to expect since the difference in the chase between games was so drastic that I had pretty much nothing to go off of. Once I made it to the end of the hallway, he stumbled through the next door I was supposed to go through and screamed before exploding. I thought that this was the entire thing because he was dead now, but he was actually not dead, in fact, and had actually gotten so huge that he covered the walls, ceiling, and even floor of an enormous room. A glowing red eye that shared the same symbol that was on Seek's eye right before he exploded was shining through the darkness on one wall and was oscillating along the path. I hid behind objects to get past and managed to slip by without being spotted. The next room had the same eye, but it was on the opposite wall, and the oscillation had a bit wider of a range to it. I opened the next door and was met with yet another eye, this time with a range of motion that covered nearly the entire pathway. The next room had 2 eyes instead of 1, and the pathway curved a bit to the right. I was just about to make it through when... Yes, I died to a pit. Don't laugh! Yeah, not gonna lie, that was probably the dumbest possible way I could have died on that run, but hey, on the bright side, at least I made it to door 188. Overall, this game was insane. It carried an amount of work and quality that rivals that of even the original game. To be honest, this game even looks official. You can barely tell that it's fan-made because it plays and looks exactly like Doors while still managing to keep its own storyline and its own unique perks. This game felt like a fever dream. The first thing I was hit with when I spawned in was this floating eyeball that was following me around. This served no purpose, but I think I'm just going to stop calling things out for not serving a purpose, so you don't have to hear that 40 times while I'm playing this game. And I'm also not even going to mention the art on the wall. I walked through a white door to start the game, which was interesting since it wasn't even a multiplayer room. All the players just got funneled into the same game. I loaded into an elevator with text reading that the doors will open very soon, despite the fact that they were already open. I tried to follow this bacon hair through the doors, but was abruptly cut off when they slammed shut on my face. I was forced to sit awkwardly in an elevator with Baldy's severed head waiting for the doors to open again. Just when I was starting to gain hope that the doors would never open, they did, which allowed me to officially start my run. The first thing I was met with was a message saying, "Welcome in hotel," with 2 very interesting pictures on both sides of the text box. Continuing forward, I found what seemed to be the first room, but it barely felt like it. There was this random dog pooping in his food bowl for some reason, and there was also a large sign welcoming me to Ohio. After unlocking the door and going through, I was met with more messages and a picture of whatever this is. After opening the next door, I got jump scared by 2 peanut butter jelly time bananas. I simply passed in between them and went into the next room, which had a few things to unpack. First of all, can anybody tell me why there was an electrical outlet on the ceiling? Just why? I also found a pit of radioactive goo and a full-wall portrait of Queso riding a motorcycle. There was an eyeless orange guarding the door, but he was chill and let me through. Opening the next door, Sanic spawned behind me and started singing a beautiful song. It took me a minute to realize that he was an entity and I was supposed to hide from him, but I did and barely avoided getting hit. At the end of the hallway was a door surrounded by even more art and a thinking emoji. After finding Dwayne the Egg Johnson and another pit of toxic goo and a Bloxy Cola machine, I found another art gallery and then found Albert. Now, I already felt like I got 14 lobotomies, but I pressed on and found a Skibbity toilet trophy with a golden toilet made out of Cotton Eye Joe chicken nuggets. I then found a vent that did not look very welcoming at all and was making a ton of no noises. I went in anyways and was immediately hit with more art that was also making sound effects. I rounded the corner and was met with this the second that I opened a vent, so I left the lobotomy vent and slid past the 2 LeBron pictures before finding a giant troll face egg in the next room. Besides this painting, there wasn't really anything of note in this room, which is really nice because I really needed a break from whatever was going on in this game. This break didn't last too long though, because in the next room I found a floating Germa head that was laughing uncontrollably. I passed more art before coming across the hallway of Talking Tom. By this point, I was completely losing my mind and was hearing random sound effects coming from all across the map that further increased the likelihood of me getting an aneurysm. I then found floating Big Chungus and Granny in the next room and tried to escape from them, but then I found Freddy Fazbear and Mr. Beast before also finding a pumpkin dude and Gru, except he's black. The next room further increased my lobotomies as I was immediately met with yelling Goofy and about 3 walls of the epic face. I then found a room that made me assume that Seek was coming and gave me a bit of hope that his chase would be slightly less brain-curdling than the rest of this game. I was completely wrong, however, as Seek was replaced with a crusty SpongeBob wall, as I had to run across wooden boards and avoid giant hands and toxic goo puddles. Once I made it past him, the SpongeBob sad sound effect played behind me as I jumped into a giant pipe before immediately climbing back up and being met with a room full of monkeys. The next room warned me that there was poop incoming, and they weren't lying. The next room had a giant king poop that was making diarrhea noises. I continued to press onwards and found a room with burning suitcases before finding a room with nothing but 3 bear traps, which felt so refreshing to find after all the chaos that had gone down throughout the playthrough. The next room was Jeff's shop, but when opening the shop you simply get brought to the pay-to-win shop, so they kind of massacred my boy Jeff. The next 2 rooms were relatively normal until I made it to door 25, which told me not to touch the final boss. The boss itself looked just like some goofy red dude and didn't really seem to have any sort of pathfinding whatsoever. He just ran in circles along his path and didn't really target players. The code to leave the room was a simple color-coded numbers puzzle, but I'm 90% sure this wasn't possible to solve. I went around and memorized the numbers, but after placing them in the order and entering the code into the lock, it did absolutely nothing. I tried again and even went back to all of the numbers, but it just would not work. This was basically the end of my run, which honestly seemed like more of a good thing than a bad thing. I don't even think I can really explain this game, nor do I really feel like trying to. Now, this game is so vastly different from Doors that it's hard to even call it a Doors clone, but I felt like I should still include it on the list since pretty much everyone who plays it compares it to Doors in one way or another. The lobby was this muddy stone platform with brick walls surrounded by a vast ocean. The doors looked like metal vaults and dropped you down into the darkness when you started to run. Now, rather than focusing on hiding from entities and escaping a hotel, the game is all about quick and fast movements to traverse the rooms as you try and get as far as possible. There are thousands of doors, so a run could last for ages longer than a Doors run could. There are also some mechanics for the doors that add a bit of variety to the otherwise very repetitive game style, such as different kinds of switches that you need to flip in order for the door to open, and a golden door plate that indicates that you need to be sliding for the door to open. There are also a lot of interesting movement mechanics. For some reason, spamming crouch as you're running makes you go slightly faster, which is a bit weird. You can also push off of walls to gain some extra speed and jump height. The entities kind of skew away a bit from the default entity mechanics that many of the Doors clones use, which is pretty cool in my opinion. The first entity is a pink eye that functions similarly to Rush, but instead of hiding in a closet, you hide in one of several little crevices in the walls or floor. Once you make it to door 20, however, that's when the game really begins. You enter a vault of some kind that is present at the end of every little section of about 40 to 60 doors each. It serves as a safe zone from entities and also resets the timer that's ticking down while you're running through the doors. You get 2 minutes and 30 seconds to make it to the next safe zone before an entity kills you. It's kinda similar to Pizza Tower in that regard, and actually has an option to enable Pizza Tower music in the background. The farther you get, the more entities that you have to evade. The next entity you find is a blue eye that you have to avoid looking at or it takes you down to half health. In the next layer, you encounter a giant worm that covers the middle of whatever room you're in, so you have to move off to the side before it kills you. There's also a black figure that will slowly cover your screen with static before killing you if he can see you. If you put a wall or really anything in between yourself and him, then he disappears. In the next layer, you'll find a red eye that has the opposite effect of the blue one. You have to look at it until you open the next door, or it will take you down to half health as well. If you are damaged by one of these eyes, then flashing RGB text will pop up on your screen every few seconds, along with a border on one side of your screen until you die. The layer after that adds 2 more entities, the Blood Rain and a smiley face, which I don't remember the name of. The Blood Rain makes it so you have to get under something before it disappears, which could be a door frame or really just anything you can put between your head and the sky. The smiley face appears on your screen and gives you about 2 to 3 seconds before you have to stop moving entirely, otherwise he kills you. Now there might be a few more entities after this, but I died right after making it to Blood Rain, so I didn't really find out. This game was really well made, but it had a playstyle that isn't really fun for all players. But then again, neither is the playstyle for regular doors. But for the people who like repetitive games, this one is a winner for sure.